to day 3 of my FND series. I hope you are finding these helpful, informative, useful, etc. Today I am going to be going through my journey to diagnosis. So for me, this was actually quite a short journey in comparison to a lot of other people who have been diagnosed with FND that I've heard of. However, I was having symptoms for a long time before that, before I looked for help. So it'll be interesting perhaps to some of you to hear the progression, and yeah, hopefully interesting. So for me, because I already had a number of medical issues going on, now when I look back on some of my medical history with the neurologists, they think that some of my symptoms from years ago may potentially have been FND, and we just didn't know at that point because it was so sporadic. So I had the odd occasion where I couldn't walk. I had issues with my balance, but it was just all put down to other reasons at the time, and it may very well have been those reasons rather than FND. So from my point of view, I think that my FND started in the sort of autumn of 2018. I started having a lot more balance issues at that point. I already had a lot of mobility problems from my hypermobility, but not to the same extent that I do now. And yeah, in sort of the late autumn of 2018, I started to get a lot more issues with my balance in particular. At that point, my GP was a little concerned and thought that I did display some symptoms of something called ataxia. So he put a referral into Neurology at that point, sort of around November, December time, I think it was. And just didn't really think much of it. I carried on. I was already using walking poles for my walking anyway, and I just kind of put it down to my hypermobility becoming more problematic for me. Then this kind of continued and actually progressed and got worse as we went into the start of 2019. But for me, my biggest FND symptoms, which are my spasms, occurred pretty much overnight. So what happened was I was on a walk. This was on the 27th of April in 2019. I was on a walk with my boyfriend at the time, and I was struggling with the pace of the walk and the distance to a certain degree, but really it was the pace. And as it went on, I started to develop these spasms, and initially it was just in my legs, and I was using 2 walking poles, and as you've seen in my previous videos, my gait now is my knees lift very high, my toes point down, and then they slap really hard down on the floor. That was what happened on this walk, and it got to the point where I wasn't really moving forward. I was just stomping on the spot. And then I was having spasms in my arms as well, which were using the walking poles, and then I started getting the spasms in my left shoulder as well. So I sat down on the floor at this point because we were out in the countryside. So I sat down on the floor and I was still spasming even when I wasn't walking, and this continued. I managed to get home. My boyfriend picked up his car and managed to get me back home, and I lay down. I didn't do anything for the next sort of day or two, to be honest, and I was having continual spasms in all of my limbs for at least 24 hours. Now, I just thought I'd overdone it. You know, I had mobility problems and I pushed myself too hard, and I thought, you know, it's my own fault, I did something stupid, it will just get better, it'll go away. And so I went back to work on the Monday, and I was a physics teacher for secondary school, so I was up on my feet all the time. I was a very energetic teacher, so I would be leaping around the room, doing all sorts of things. And of course, being a science teacher, you're doing lots of practicals, you're doing lots of moving around the room, helping students with practicals. So there's a lot of movement required, and I was having these low-level spasms all week, but not to the point where it was interfering with my work. It was just there in the background. Fast forward as we go through the week to Friday, however, which was the Friday the 3rd of May. I know this because it was the Friday before the bank holiday Monday that we had last year. And I was having spasms on my drive to work. And of course this scared me somewhat. I was still safe with my driving, but I wasn't happy. And when I got to work, I sat down at my desk to start going through my emails and start bringing up all of my resources for the day on my laptop, and my hands were spasming so much that I couldn't use the keyboard. And looking back on it now, I realised that what I was having with my hands as well was dystonia, because my hands were fully clenched and I was having to type with my knuckles. And I turned around to my head of department and I went, I don't think, something's going on, something's wrong. And I explained what had happened, and of course they were immediately very concerned. They got the school nurse in and she was very concerned. So we phoned up my GP, they got me in straight away, and the GP again was very concerned. He had obviously seen me a few months before, and so he knew that I was having issues, but he said the fact that it had progressed this fast and I was having all these symptoms was not good news, and he was very concerned. So he immediately sent me straight off to A&E. So at this point I was having, again, full body spasms, not to the extent that I had been the weekend before, but I was having the spasms in all my limbs. And A&E had looked at me, they did some blood tests, they did an EKG, all of which came back fine. At that point they decided to admit me so that they could do a CT of my brain, because at that point they thought there must be something going on in my brain. And that came back clear as well. Now, as I just mentioned, this was the Friday before the bank holiday weekend, and the hospital that I went to didn't have a resident neurologist, and they had no idea why I was having all of these problems. So at that point, having got a clear CT, the doctors decided the best thing to do would be to discharge me and send me home and refer me externally to see neurology. The reason for this was that being on an acute ward for 3 days with potentially lots of infectious patients, when they had no idea what was causing my problems, seemed very risky to them. To me, I felt devastated because I live alone and I was being sent home with all of these issues, no answers, no way to cope. I just was sent home. I understand why they did it, but it was still quite stressful for me. So at that point they put the referral in for the neurologist. Whilst the neurologist was waiting for an appointment to come up, they decided that they wanted to also do an MRI of my brain, because obviously a CT doesn't show everything, and they wanted to check for a couple of things. In particular, they were looking for signs of MS. So yeah, they sent me for an MRI of my brain, and that was actually only a few weeks later, on the 18th of May. And I didn't get the results of that until I went for my neurology appointment, which then wasn't until the 9th of August. So you can imagine I spent a long time signed off from work, unable to work. I stayed with my boyfriend because I couldn't look after myself, and I was having to lie on the sofa or lie in bed for most of the day. I couldn't prepare meals, I couldn't do anything because anything I did made the spasms worse, and at that point I was having them 24 hours a day, all the time. So I went for this appointment with the neurologist, and she said that the MRI of my brain was clear. So at that point she went through an entire medical history with me, looked at all of my previous surgeries. She wanted to know about when I was born, whether it was a complicated birth. She wanted to know everything possible about my medical history. She did a number of neurological, like the full neurological exam, and she noted that when we did the examinations, the spasms and the jerking movements became even more pronounced, which I still get to this day. If I try and do things where I'm having to concentrate on what I'm doing with my limbs, the spasms get bigger and more. So at that point my muscle power seemed to be normal, as far as she could tell, and I wasn't showing any signs of dystonia at that point either. So she went, well, all of these tests are normal, you're displaying all of these symptoms, I think it's probably something called functional movement disorder. She said it can get better, but it requires specialist intervention. And she said, but because of my symptoms, she wanted to make sure for certain that it was this functional movement disorder. And to do that, we needed to do an MRI of my spine and an EEG, as well as nerve conduction studies. So she arranged for me to go to Queen Square in the centre of London to have all of these done in one day as an inpatient for the day, so as a day patient. So I went for those in August, and I managed to get some of the results straight away from them, basically because I was desperate to go back to work, and I wanted to know what my prognosis was, what I potentially could do, where was this going. I just needed to know what the situation was. And all the results appeared normal, which confirmed what the initial neurologist suspected, that I had functional neurological disorder or functional movement disorder. Now, at that point, the neurologist I was talking with in Queen Square mentioned a website that might be helpful for me to have a look at to try and get some self-help in the meantime, and that website is neurosymptoms.org. I have to admit, that was super helpful for me. I will link it below for you all, and I will be discussing that in a later video. But if you have been recently, or not even recently, diagnosed with FND, I highly recommend you check that out. It's written by one of the top specialists on FND in the UK, and it's got some really helpful information. So he sent me off with that, and then I got my next neurology appointment with my neurologist in January 2020, so this year. And in that appointment, she confirmed that, yes, I do have functional movement disorder. So that's essentially the end of my diagnosis journey. So that's when I got my official diagnosis. It's obviously not the end of my story, but that's all we're going to look at for today. I hope this video has been interesting for you all and useful if you're going through this diagnosis journey yourself. I know for a lot of people they're not as lucky as me to have a really thorough neurologist who is willing to check everything. So in my case, I had all of the tests to confirm my diagnosis, and I have to admit I do feel lucky that I was put through all of those diagnostics so that I can have the confidence in my diagnosis. Also, as I said at the beginning of this video, although it might seem like I had a long period of time where I didn't really know what was going on, it certainly felt like that to me at the time. But I know that some people with FND can have gone 10 years or more before they get a diagnosis. I also know that some people wait multiple years before they even get to see a neurologist to be able to start this journey as well. So again, I feel lucky in some respects that I had access to this good medical care. I'm sorry if today's video has been a little bit rambly. As I'm sure you can imagine, discussing this journey is quite difficult in some ways, because it was tough to go through, and for me this is now, it all started just over a year ago, so this is still very fresh for me. However, I do feel like it's helpful for people to understand what the process is like and help people who are me a year ago, lying on the couch going, oh my god, what am I going to do? Hopefully see that it's not the end of the world. So hope today's been interesting. If you are enjoying these FND videos, please do subscribe. As I said previously, we're doing 7 days in a row of FND videos, information and my experiences. And if you're not here for the FND stuff, stick around, because we've got plenty of other content coming up over the next few weeks as well. Lots of horsey stuff, and yeah, so see you all tomorrow.